early 1980s, a wave of terror swept through the streets of Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. Women were disappearing at an alarming rate, only to be found later, lifeless, discarded in secluded wooded areas, near rivers, and in other remote locations. The victims all shared chilling similarities, yet the killer remained elusive. He was careful, methodical, and left behind little evidence for investigators to follow. For nearly 2 decades, law enforcement officers tirelessly hunted a phantom, a faceless predator whose growing body count sent shockwaves through the community. The media dubbed him the Green River Killer, a name that would become synonymous with fear and mystery. Detectives pored over crime scenes, analyzed patterns, and followed countless leads, yet the killer always seemed to be one step ahead. But beneath the monstrous persona of this remorseless murderer was a man who appeared completely ordinary to those around him. His name was Gary Leon Ridgway, a quiet and unassuming truck painter who managed to blend seamlessly into society. He worked diligently at his job, maintained relationships, and lived what seemed to be a normal life. Yet behind his mask, he harbored dark urges that drove him to commit some of the most horrific crimes in American history. For years, he evaded justice, hiding in plain sight. Gary Leon Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah. His early years were far from ordinary. He grew up in a difficult household where his strict and controlling mother played a dominant role in his upbringing. Their relationship was complicated, marked by both admiration and deep resentment. His father, a bus driver, often spoke negatively about sex workers, an attitude that left a lasting impression on young Gary. As a child, he struggled with bedwetting well into his teenage years, and his mother's harsh reactions made the situation even more distressing. Gary later admitted that he had conflicting emotions toward her, describing a mixture of strong attachment and underlying anger. By his teenage years, he showed disturbing tendencies. At 16 years old, he lured a 6-year-old boy into the woods and stabbed him, leaving him bleeding and laughing as he walked away. The boy survived, but Ridgway faced no real consequences. This was the first sign of the violent predator he would become. After high school, Ridgway enlisted in the U.S. Navy and served in Vietnam. While overseas, he frequently visited sex workers, despite contracting sexually transmitted infections. When he returned home, he married his first wife, but their marriage was short-lived. By the late 1970s, Ridgway had remarried and settled into what appeared to be an ordinary life in Seattle. He worked as a truck painter, attended church regularly, and even read the Bible aloud at home. However, during this time, he developed a growing fixation on sex workers, frequently seeking them out while also harboring strong negative feelings toward them. He later claimed that he believed his actions were part of a higher purpose. In 1982, Ridgway acted on his urges, and a series of crimes began. In July of that year, the bodies of 5 women were discovered along the Green River, marking the start of a long and unsettling case. Ridgway targeted vulnerable women, including sex workers and runaways, often approaching them along Highway 99. He would take their lives in various ways, leaving little evidence behind. Over time, more victims were found in wooded areas, near rivers, and other secluded locations, making it difficult for authorities to track the person responsible. By the year 1984, authorities had confirmed that at least 42 women had lost their lives under similar circumstances. Yet despite their efforts, police had no solid leads that could point them directly to the killer. In response to the growing number of victims, law enforcement established the Green River Task Force, a specialized investigative team that included Detective Dave Reichert and later, the infamous serial killer Ted Bundy, who had already been sentenced to death for his own crimes. Bundy, using his experience as a murderer to analyze the case, advised investigators that the person responsible was likely revisiting the locations where he had left his victims, possibly engaging in disturbing activities with their remains. As the investigation progressed, it was discovered that Bundy's theory had been correct. In 1987, police identified Gary as a potential suspect due to his frequent interactions with sex workers, as well as reports that one of the missing victims had last been seen in his company. Acting on this suspicion, investigators brought him in for questioning, hoping to uncover any evidence that could link him to the crimes. As part of their efforts, they collected a saliva sample from him, believing it could be useful in confirming or ruling out his involvement. However, due to the limitations of DNA technology at the time, Forensic testing was unable to make a conclusive match, leaving investigators without the proof they needed to keep him in custody. With no substantial evidence tying him to the murders, Gary was released and allowed to return to his normal life. Although he continued his killing spree after being let go, he became much more cautious, adjusting his methods to avoid drawing attention to himself. For years, the Green River Killer remained unidentified, frustrating law enforcement officials and keeping the public in fear. Throughout this time, Gary managed to maintain an outward appearance of normalcy, which allowed him to continue avoiding suspicion. In 1988, he married his third wife, who had no idea that the man she had fallen in love with was living a double life, hiding a dark secret. While his crimes did not stop completely, the frequency of his killings decreased significantly during the 1990s, making authorities believe that the Green River Killer had either disappeared, been arrested for an unrelated crime, or possibly even died. Unbeknownst to them, Gary simply believed he had successfully evaded capture and had grown confident that his past crimes would never be linked to him. By 2001, forensic science had advanced significantly, allowing investigators to re-examine old evidence using newly developed DNA technology. Determined to solve the case once and for all, authorities decided to retest biological evidence that had been collected from crime scenes in the 1980s. This time, the results were clear. The saliva sample taken from Gary in 1987 was a direct match to DNA found on multiple victims, finally providing police with the proof they needed to arrest him. On November 30, 2001, after nearly 2 decades of searching for the elusive Green River Killer, law enforcement officers arrived at the Kenworth truck factory, where Gary had worked for years, and took him into custody. Now facing overwhelming forensic evidence, Gary realized there was no way to escape justice. In an attempt to avoid the death penalty, he agreed to a plea deal, cooperating with authorities in exchange for life in prison rather than execution. In November 2003, he pleaded guilty to 48 murders, making him one of the deadliest serial killers in U.S. history at the time. During his confession, he later stated that the actual number of victims was likely much higher, estimating that he may have taken the lives of 70 to 90 women, though he admitted he had lost track of the exact number. His method remained consistent throughout the years. He would lure his victims by gaining their trust, then take their lives before disposing of their remains in remote locations. Gary showed no signs of remorse for what he had done, and when questioned about his crimes, he coldly stated, "I killed so many women, I have a hard time keeping them straight." On December 18, 2003, he was sentenced to 48 life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would remain behind bars for the rest of his life. He was spared execution in exchange for assisting authorities in locating the remains of additional victims. Even in prison, Gary has shown little emotion when discussing his crimes, speaking about them in a detached and matter-of-fact manner. Over the years, investigators have continued searching for missing victims, hoping to bring closure to the families affected by his actions, though it is likely that many of them will never be found.